You don't need to learn Zenu, need to stop running from the fact that you already know it. But you're too busy looking for the key that's in your pocket. Modern culture has transformed Zen Buddhism into a self-help product, synonymous with calm, minimalist aesthetics for interior decoration and Instagram feeds. What is Zen Buddhism? It has become a market question, relaxation technique, empty mental state, exotic Eastern philosophy for Western consumption. You seek explanations of Zen Buddhism as if it were information to be accumulated. Just another concept to add to your already saturated mental library of unpracticed spiritual knowledge. But here's the paradox that generates discomfort. Every second you spend studying what is Zen instead of practicing is proof that you are still operating in the very intellectual paralysis that Zen came to destroy. What you call a spiritual quest is merely your mind creating sophisticated problems to avoid the one thing that terrifies you, realizing that there is nothing to be sought, conquered, or achieved. Zen is not a path to enlightenment. It is the brutal destruction of the idea that you need a path. When Bodhidharma said vast emptiness, nothing sacred to Emperor Wu, who was hoping for spiritual validation, he was cutting the root of the search for external meaning, demolishing fantasies of accumulable merit and measurable progress. Zen Buddhism for beginners doesn't start with theory. It starts with confrontation. You are looking for glasses that are on your head, seeking future completeness when you are already complete now. This is not comforting poetry. It is a clinical diagnosis of your condition. You don't have a real problem. You manufacture problems through resistance to what is and the demand that reality be different. The suffering you feel is not an injustice of fate. It is the result of operating against the factual mechanism of impermanence, using attachment as a flawed strategy for impossible security. This content isn't meant to teach you how to empty your mind or achieve a mystical state of permanent peace. Don't expect comforting philosophical explanation, validation that you're on the right path, or Buddhist erudition for intellectual entertainment. I'm going to show you why Zen is a radical rejection of all seeking, all accumulation of spiritual merit, all concepts including the very concept of Zen as something separate from ordinary life. You'll understand direct mind-to-mind transmission, not as mysticism, but as the demolition of conceptual intermediaries between you and reality. The tools here's ancient Zen koans, the practice of non-self, don't exist to make you better. They exist to destroy the illusion that you need to improve. The goal isn't to alleviate suffering through spiritual anesthesia. It's to teach you to traverse the mechanism of suffering production with the inner posture of someone who has stopped running away and started facing facts without dramatic narrative. Consciousness demands abandoning the crutches of the ego, radical acceptance that the ordinary mind is already the path, and a brutal recognition that you are complete now and always have been. You believe that accumulating spiritual knowledge is the path to liberation, that reading yet another book on Buddhism will finally give you the key to enlightenment. The living dead collects meditation techniques, memorizes Abhidharma concepts, debates Buddhist philosophy, all while continuing to suffer exactly as before. This is scholarly paralysis. You know everything about liberation theoretically, but remain trapped because you've turned the Dharma into a giant library where knowledge has become a new attachment. When Buddhism arrived in China from India, it carried centuries of conceptual elaboration that had transformed direct practice into sophisticated scholarship. You are doing exactly that now, using spirituality as intellectual procrastination, mental masturbation disguised as growth. The brutal truth no one wants to hear Every additional book you read without practicing is an extra layer of mud on top of the diamond. In India, monks developed complex philosophical systems, endless categories of mental states, detailed analyses of consciousness, and the result was spirituality becoming an obstacle instead of a solution. Excess as an obstacle is not a metaphor. When you have 10 different meditation techniques and don't practice any of them deeply, you're running around in paralysis from analysis. Zen Chan, in Chinese derived from Dhyana, arose as a brutal reaction to this radical anti-intellectual movement that said, enough with texts, enough with preparation, enough with endless analysis. Direct mind-to-mind transmission was heresy against the Buddhist establishment that had made erudition its path, but it was the only way out for those drowning in concepts. Here is the survival mechanism that Zen offers with absolute brutality. Special transmission outside of scriptures. Not set forth in words, points directly to the human mind, sees nature and becomes Buddha. This is not mystical poetry. It's an operational protocol that cuts through the proliferation of thoughts and cognitive debris you've accumulated calling spiritual. Study. Zen Buddhism for beginners starts here. Identify how many books you've read on meditation without meditating. How many techniques you've accumulated without rigorously practicing any of them. Every additional concept without practical application is just pure noise that distances you from the practice of real disidentification. The conscious elite understands that spiritual knowledge used as a postponement of practice is sophisticated cowardice. You're busy studying, swimming while drowning, analyzing the water instead of simply moving. But if Zen cuts off all intellectual preparation, who was brutal enough to bring that blade in the first place? And why did its arrival shatter the expectations of those who hoped for spiritual validation? You expect spiritual masters to validate you, to recognize your effort, and tell you that you are on the right path. The undead seek spiritual figures who function as approving parents, someone who sees your good deeds and confirms that you are accumulating merit, evolving, becoming better. This is the transactional logic that contaminates spirituality. You do good things, build temples, sponsor monks, practice rituals, and expect proportional spiritual reward. Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty operated exactly like this. He had built Buddhist temples, financed the translation of sutras, sponsored an entire monastic community. When Voidharma arrived in China, the emperor expected validation. He expected this master to recognize the greatness of his spiritual investment, the truth that shattered the emperor's fantasy. What is the merit of what I have done? Wu asked. No merit, Bodhidharma replied with surgical coldness. This was not gratuitous cruelty. It was operational karuna, cutting illusion at the root. Bodhidharma and Emperor Wu is the definitive story of how true compassion appears as a lack of empathy to those who seek solace. When the emperor insisted, "What is the supreme truth of Dharma?" the answer was vast emptiness, nothing sacred, a complete demolition of the idea that there is any formulable truth to be attained. Every concept is already a prism. Every verbalized truth is already a distortion. And when Wu desperately asked, "If there is nothing sacred, who are you standing before me?" Bodhidharma simply said, "I don't know," a radical refusal to identify with any role, identity, or spiritual mask. Here is the demolition protocol that Bodhidharma brought as a direct transmission. You don't gain spiritual points for good deeds. You don't accumulate karmic credits through rituals. You don't build an identity of evolved practitioner. Bodhidharma's teachings operate through radical negativity, removing all conceptual crutches until only direct perception remains, without ego mediation. Where are you seeking spiritual validation now? Merit through practices? Identity as a conscious seeker? Recognition that you are on the right path? Bodhidharma cuts all of that with Zen brutality that asks no permission. Confrontation as compassion means destroying illusions that keep a person suffering, even if it hurts infinitely more than a false embrace. The conscious elite recognizes that a master who validates you is betraying you. A master who confronts you is liberating you. This is the explanation of Zen Buddhism as a survival strategy, not as a comforting philosophy. But if Bodhidharma destroyed even the idea of spiritual merit, what tools did he leave for those willing to abandon all crutches? And why are these tools designed to demolish, not to build? You believe meditation is a relaxation technique, used to calm you down after a stressful day or to achieve a special state of peace. The living dead seeks spiritual practices as a consumer of well-being, wanting measurable results, visible progress, a feeling of spiritually evolving. This is the illusion that Zazen meditation is a self-help product. You sit expecting tranquility, instant mental clarity, or at least temporary relief from the anxiety that corrodes you. You don't realize you're using spiritual practice as anesthesia, just another sophisticated way to escape confronting factual reality. The Zen meditation technique you romanticize has nothing to do with relaxation. It's a hammer against the structure of habitual thought, a systematic demolition of all expectations of comfort. The brutal truth about Zen tools: Shikantaza sitting alone has no object of concentration, no goal of achieving a special state. You sit because sitting is what's happening now, period. When thoughts arise, you notice them and return. Each return is a brutal repetition that trains the mind not to identify with mental content through radical disidentification. Buddhist koans like "what was your original face like before your parents were born?" are not riddles to be solved intellectually. They are bombs to explode logical thought. Viruses designed to crash the operating system of the conceptual mind. And mind-to-mind transmission happens without words, without concepts, without explanations. The master sees when something has fundamentally changed in the way the student inhabits reality, not through verbal response, but through visible transformation in presence. These tools do not respect the comfort of the ego. Zazen forces you to confront the deadly boredom of existing without stimulus. Koans frustrate the intellect until it gives up. Direct transmission negates the crutch of verbal explanation. There is the rigorous training that separates Zen practice from the consumption of wellness. Choose nows. It for 20 minutes simply observing your breath without expectation of results, without the goal of progressing, without a narrative of becoming better. Or contemplate a Zen koan like what is the sound of one hand clapping, without trying to solve it, simply holding the contradiction until it holds you back. Observe the ego's rebellion demanding measurable progress, wanting to know, am I doing it right? Seeking validation that the time invested is worthwhile. Zazen practice is precisely this confrontation with the paralysis of choice. You want results without doing work. You want sudden enlightenment without crossing the desert of boredom. You want direct transmission without abandoning the need for verbal understanding. The operator of lucidity understands that these tools are applied brutality, not therapy, not relaxation, not comfortable mindfulness. It is training in radical detachment, where you learn that thought is a servant, not a master, where conscious witness observes without clinging, where no mind emerges, not as mystical emptiness, but as action without excessive mediation from the functional ego. But if these tools destroy conceptual thought, where has this demolition found its most lethal application? And why did warriors need Zen to survive what philosophers never managed to confront? You believe that thinking more and analyzing better will give you control over difficult situations, that hesitating to evaluate options is a sign of intelligence. The living dead lives paralyzed in endless analysis, wanting assurance that the decision is correct before acting, needing emotional security before moving, demanding certainty about the outcome before starting. This is cognitive paralysis disguised as prudence. You call being responsible what is merely a sophisticated fear of making mistakes, intellectual cowardice dressed as rationality. You don't realize that every second of hesitation is a lost opportunity. That while you internally debate, should I do X or Y, life has already decided for you through your inaction. The Zen samurai wasn't born from contemplative philosophy. It was born from a brutal need for survival, where hesitation means instant death. The factual truth of combat, if you think, should I attack or defend? For even a second, you're already dead. Mushin no mind is not mystical emptiness. It's an operational state where action happens without the mediation of thought, where the response emerges directly from perception without passing through the filter of the ego, asking, how does this affect me? The samurai who survived were those who practiced until archer, bow, and target became a single movement. There was no longer me shooting at that, only the act of shooting arising from the totality of the situation without personal narrative. Zen and samurai met because war demanded exactly what Zen offered: death of hesitation, spontaneous action without paralyzing analysis, decision without thinking that is not impulsiveness, but clarity without analysis. Their Zen meditation was not relaxation. It was training in the observation of thought until death as a teacher was radically accepted. If you are not ready to die at every moment, you are not alive. Here's a modern application that cuts through romanticization. Identify now the area of your life where you chronically hesitate career decisions, necessary confrontations, relationships that need to end. Hesitation is the ego trying to guarantee impossible security. It's the reactive mind wanting to control the outcome before allowing action. Applied mushin means you act in the right direction even without guarantees. You respond to life without the filter of what if it goes wrong. You execute the necessary movement before the thought completes its cycle of doubt. This is not impulsiveness. It's training until it disappears. Rigorous practice where you repeat the correct action so many times that it emerges without consulting the functional ego. The Zen art of archery Kudo teaches this. You don't shoot the arrow, you become the act of shooting. There is no observer separate from the action. The conscious elite practices this in daily life when the correct decision is obvious, but the ego demands more analysis. You cut it off at the root and act, applying the mushin sword that doesn't hesitate because it has already traversed the fear of death through radical acceptance. Each moment of hesitation that you identify and cut off is Zen action training. Wu Wei operating as action without action. It's not passivity. It's movement that arises without internal resistance from the ego trying to protect an illusory identity. But if motion emerges from repeated practice until you disappear into the action, where else does this dissolution of the self occur? Why does Zen insist that the ordinary is as sacred as any spiritual ritual? You believe that spiritual practice happens in special moments, silent retreats. morning meditation, tranquil environments far from urban chaos. The living dead divides life into spiritual elevated moments, formal practices, states of peace and mundane work, household chores, boring routine that needs to be tolerated until the next meditation session. This fragmentation of consciousness keeps you eternally dissatisfied. You endure 90% of life waiting for the spiritual 10%, treating the ordinary as an obstacle to be overcome to reach the sacred. You don't realize that this artificial division is a self-imposed prison. You are always postponing total presence until when you have ideal conditions, always seeking the special while rejecting what is before you now. The Zen tea ceremony that you romanticize is not aesthetics or cultural performance. It is the demolition of this illusion that there is a difference between sacred and mundane. The truth that shatters your fantasy of separate spirituality before enlightenment, chopping wood, carrying water. After enlightenment, chopping wood, carrying water. Zen refused to divide existence into categories because the ordinary mind is the path. There is no more sacred or less sacred moment, only the quality of presence that you bring or don't bring to each action. A sink full of dirty dishes is as valid as a temple altar. The difference is not in the action, but in how you inhabit the act. Canoe tea ceremony is training in total presence in every microscopic movement, washing bowls, heating water, serving, drinking, where each gesture receives complete attention without the mind wandering in narratives about the past or future. When you wash dishes with total attention, feeling the water temperature, the texture of the sponge, the movement of your hands, you are not doing housework while waiting for real life to begin. You are completely alive in the only moment that exists, operating and living in the present without the illusion that there is another place to be. Here is the protocol that dissolves the division between the spiritual and the mundane. Choose an ordinary activity today. Brushing your teeth, walking, making coffee, and perform it with the practice of absolute presence in each sensation, each movement, without allowing your mind to wander into planning or rumination. This is Zen in daily life applied without romanticization. It's not adding a layer of spiritual meaning to common action. It's removing the layer of rejection you place on the ordinary. Zen calligraphy, Zen art, flower arranging have become paths not because they are special activity, but because they demand total presence. A poorly executed brushstroke reveals an agitated mind. Art becomes a mirror of the inner state, offering immediate feedback on the quality of attention. The operator of clarity understands that wabi-sabi and Zen simplicity are not minimalist aesthetics for decoration. They are the recognition that the extraordinary is embedded in the ordinary when you stop searching for the special. Every time you reject the present moment waiting for ideal conditions, you are operating in avoidance of shunyata, using spiritual seeking as noise as a shield against confrontation with the technical here and now. The practice of non-self happens at the sink, as much as on the meditation cushion. You dissolve the illusion that there is a special me who deserves better moments than this. But if the ordinary mind is already the path, why do so many practitioners get stuck trying to empty the mind, and what is the fatal misconception that transforms liberating practice into a new form of imprisonment? You believe that the goal of Zen is to achieve a state of mind that is empty, free from thoughts, a kind of permanent inner silence. The undead is endlessly frustrated, trying not to think, fighting against every thought that arises as if it were an invader to be eliminated, judging its practice as a failure every time the mind produces content. This is the trap of mental suppression, disguised as spiritual practice. You transform meditation into a war against your own mind, creating additional tension by trying to force mental emptiness as if it were a goal to be achieved. You don't realize that you're operating on solving excess thinking through more thinking. You think about not thinking. You strive to stop effort. You create a new problem trying to solve the original problem. The search for an empty mind is a contradiction that keeps you trapped in exactly what you are trying to escape. The truth that dissolves this illusion at its root. Even in Zen masters with decades of practice, thoughts continue to arise naturally. The difference is not the quantity of thoughts, but the relationship with them. Thought arises, is noticed without judgment, dissolves. There is no I that clings or rejects, only neutral observation, like a scientist observing a natural phenomenon. You are not the thoughts. You are the space where thoughts arise. Just as the sky is not affected by passing clouds, consciousness is not affected by passing thoughts. When you try to force your mind not to think, you create tension that prevents exactly what you see. It's like trying to sleep by forcing yourself to sleep, where effort is an obstacle to the result. Zazen practice is not mind control. It is observation without identity. Radical disidentification, where you train yourself to see thought as an external event instead of an internal identity. In Zazen, when thought arises, you neither fight nor follow it. You simply notice there is thought without adding a layer of judgment about the quality or quantity of what appears. Here's the training that cuts through a fatal misconception during practice. When you realize you're trying not to think, recognize it immediately. That's already thought running in the background. Meta-thinking about thought. There's nothing wrong with thinking. The problem is identifying with thought as if it were you, believing that you are, and the mental content that flows through consciousness. Note each thought as an external event, applying thought observation without attachment. There is planning, there is worry, there is memory. Impersonal language that maintains distance between observer and observed. The mind as water teaches this. Water does not fight against stones that fall into it. It only registers the impact and returns to its natural state of rest. Precise thought emerges from this clarity, not from violent suppression. When you stop fighting the mind, it naturally calms down like a lake that stops being agitated. The conscious elite practices witness awareness, observing each thought arising and dissolving without identifying with any, recognizing that authentic mind is not the absence of thought, but the absence of attachment to thought. Every time you notice, I'm trying not to think, you have already applied the practice correctly. You have observed the mechanism in action without being dragged along by it. This is the hierarchy of the mind operating with discernment, where thought serves you instead of controlling you. But if you are not the thoughts that arise, if there is no fixed observer separate from mental processes, then who or what are you really? And why does this question destroy the foundation of everything you believe about identity? You believe there is a fixed, permanent, and independent self, a central essence that defines who you are and remains identical through time. The undead operates by protecting this identity as if it were a fragile treasure. I am like this. This doesn't suit me. I'm not the type to do X. This is the illusion of continuity that keeps you trapped in a fixed identity narrative. You feel you're the same person you were 10 years ago, defending your characteristics as permanent properties, fighting against any change that threatens this constructed self-image. You don't realize that every cell in your body has been replaced. Every memory has been reconstructed by the brain. Every opinion has changed drastically, but you insist on the narrative that something has remained identical, something essential that transcends time without alteration. This fantasy of a fixed self is a self-imposed prison, where you reject necessary transformation because it would betray who you are. The brutal truth that destroys the foundation of identity. When you look inward seeking the self, you find only transient perceptions, sensations, and thoughts, never a separate and permanent observer. An utter non-self doesn't mean you don't exist. It means there is no fixed you, only a constantly changing process that the brain artificially names self to create an illusion of continuity. David Hume and the Buddha theory of the self arrived at the same conclusion. The self is merely a temporary collection of processes, a bundle of experiences without any permanent substance behind it. Modern neuroscience, through Thomas Metzinger, confirms the self is a construct of the brain, an internal model useful for social navigation, but without a real physical correspondent. There is no command center in the brain, only networks processing information in a distributed manner. The tunnel of the ego is a necessary illusion for biological survival. But confusing model with reality is a categorical error that generates unnecessary suffering through the defense of what never existed as a fixed entity. Here is the investigative protocol that dissolves the illusion of identity. Now look for the self you so vehemently defend, not the narrative about who you are, but the real and permanent observer. Are you your thoughts? No. Because you observe thoughts arising and dissolving. Are you your emotions? No. Because emotions change radically while you seemingly remain. Are you your body? No. Because the body constantly changes through impermanence without your permission. What remains when you remove all of that? Only ownerless consciousness, a process happening without a fixed entity commanding it. Liberation from the non-self is not depressing. It is radical. If there is no fixed self, there is nothing permanent to protect, no essence that can be betrayed by change. You can radically transform without losing who you are because there was never a fixed essence, only a narrative you repeated until you believed it. The operator of clarity practices the Buddhism of the non-self as a survival strategy. Every time you catch yourself defending, I am like this, identify, that is only thinking about identity, not real identity. The self as a process liberates you from the prison of having to be consistent with a past self-image. You respond to what life demands now without consulting who you should be based on an old narrative. This is the practice of applied disidentification. You act without the filter of, does this fit with my identity? Without the territory of egoic projection, limiting possible responses to factual reality. But if there is no fixed self to defend, what explains the suffering you feel when you lose something or someone? And how does the attachment mechanism manufacture pain from the impossible demands you place on reality? You believe that attachment is only about material things, money, possessions, relationships, and that the problem lies in the external objects you desire. The living dead lives trying to solve suffering by changing external circumstances, getting a better job, finding the ideal partner, accumulating sufficient financial security. This is the illusion that pain comes from outside, that if you finally get what you want and eliminate what you don't want, you will finally rest in permanent peace. You don't realize that you are attacking symptoms while ignoring the mechanism of manufacturing suffering. You experience pleasure and want it to last forever. You experience pain and want it to end immediately. But the problem is not pleasure or pain, it is the demand for reality to be different from what it is. Every "I need this to be happy" is programming for guaranteed future suffering. Every "this cannot happen to me" is resistance that generates friction when impermanence inevitably manifests. The brutal truth about the mechanism of attachment, the greatest attachment, is not to external things, but to the fixed identity you defend as permanent property. Every time you say, "I am like this, I am not the type to do X, this doesn't suit me," you create a prison where necessary change becomes a threat to your self-image. When reality demands that you be different, you suffer not from the change itself, but from attachment to the narrative of who you should be. Attachment and suffering operate through simple causality. Anicca, impermanence, is not sad philosophy. It is a technical description of reality where nothing remains identical for 2 consecutive moments. When you cling to what will inevitably change, and everything changes, you program future suffering through an impossible demand for permanence. This is not Buddhist moralism against desire. It is a technical diagnosis of how pain is manufactured, the demand that the impermanent be permanent, that the constantly flowing process obey your need for stability, that the universe negotiate with your egoic preferences. Here is the radical detachment training that cuts the root of suffering. Identify your 3 greatest attachments now. They can be things, house, financial security, people, family, partner, or concepts, professional identity, political convictions that define you. Practice contemplating the total loss of each, not as a morbid exercise, but as a training in accepting the impermanence that is already operating now. What remains when everything is gone? This question is not pessimistic, is an investigation into what is truly necessary versus what is narrative luxury of the ego. The end of attachment is not indifference. It is the radical maturity of fully engaging with life without demanding that it be permanent. It is loving deeply while accepting that everything ends without creating existential drama over a neutral fact. The operator of clarity understands that practical Zen Buddhism operates here. Each moment of identified attachment is an opportunity to let go before reality forces release through painful loss. When you anticipate impermanence through deliberate contemplation, you lose the power to destroy you when it finally manifests. This is Zen training applied as a way to prevent collapse. You don't wait to lose everything to accept that everything is temporary. You practice acceptance now while you still have what you will inevitably lose. Every time you find yourself demanding permanence, this has to last. I can't lose this. You identify the mechanism of manufacturing suffering in real time and apply sovereign cutting. This too shall pass and I will be fine, because it never depended on external conditions remaining identical. But if attachment operates through impossible demands that the mind makes on reality, there is a tool specifically designed to block this mechanism. And why does this tool work? Precisely because it is logically impossible to solve. You believe that Zen koans are philosophical enigmas to be solved through deeper thought or more sophisticated analysis. The undead approaches what is the sound of one hand clapping as an intellectual puzzle, seeking a logical answer, searching for hidden meaning that conceptual thought can decipher. This is the trap of turning a demolition tool into an object of academic study. You treat koan as a problem to be solved by the same rational mind that the koan was designed to destroy. You don't realize you're operating in intellectual masturbation, using intellect to try to hack a tool that exists specifically to lock the intellect. Students sometimes memorize correct answers to Buddhist koans from other masters, thinking that verbal information is what matters, without understanding that an authentic answer is not verbal id, is visible transformation, a demonstration of understanding through action or presence that the master immediately detects as genuine or false. The brutal truth about the structure of the impossible, show me your original face before your parents were born, has no logical answer. It cannot be solved by thinking more or better. It is intentionally designed to be logically impossible, a virus that crashes the operating system of the conceptual mind. The master doesn't want you to solve the koan. He wants you to exhaust yourself trying. He wants the intellect to admit complete defeats and stop trying to control reality through analysis. Examples of Zen koans like a regional face koan or sound of a hand work, because they force collapse as a goal when you finally give up trying to solve it after. Weeks or months of holding on to contradiction when the ego stops trying to force verbal understanding. There can be sudden enlightenment, not as a logical conclusion, but as direct perception unmediated by thought. This is not mysticism. It is a technical protocol for breaking conceptual entanglement that keeps you trapped in endless analytical territory. The koan is a Zen paradox applied as a weapon. It uses Zen contradiction to expose that the logical mind cannot access certain layers of reality. That direct perception is only available when conceptual thought collapses from exhaustion. Here's a modern application you can perform without a formal Zen master. Choose a classic koan like "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" and contemplate it without trying to solve it intellectually. Just hold the impossible question, inhabit the tension of the contradiction without seeking escape through a verbal answer. When the mind offers an intelligent answer, discard it immediately. When frustration arises from not being able to solve it, observe without judgment. Keep holding the koan until it starts holding you back. You don't need formal transmission to use koans as Haxane existential paradox will do. If there is no fixed self, who is choosing not to believe in self? If everything is impermanent, what observes impermanence? The conscious elite uses these impossible questions as a practice of interrupting compulsive thinking, as a relevance filter that exposes when you're running in a dead-end analysis cycle. Classic koans teach that authentic answer is not transmitted information, but visible transformation. You don't learn. The answer, your pumas answer, lies in a fundamental shift in how one inhabits reality. Every time you notice the mind attempting to solve koans logically, you are already practicing correctly. You have observed the ego's escape mechanism that seeks to transform demolition into a new object of accumulable knowledge. The goal is not to collect them as intellectual trophies, but to allow them to demolish overconfidence in conceptual. Thought is the only way to know reality. This is gradual versus sudden enlightenment, operating through brutal repetition until the nervous system accepts that there is perception beyond verbal analysis. But if koans destroy confidence in conceptual thought and anatta dissolves the illusion of a fixed self, what happens when you apply this demolition to Zen itself? And why is destroying even the idea of Zen a mark of authentic understanding? You believe that practicing Zen makes you special, that being a Zen practitioner is a superior identity, that accumulating knowledge about Chan Buddhism puts you above those who don't know these teachings. The undead transforms Zen into a new attachment-toosing practice as a badge of spiritual superiority, creating an identity of evolved seeker, feeling subtle pride in being on the path while others remain ignorant. This is the trap of transforming a tool of liberation into a new egoic prison, You replace worldly attachments with spiritual attachments. Exchange the identity of materially successful for spiritually enlightened, but the mechanism of fabricating an illusory self remains identical. You don't realize that you are using Zen as a self-improvement project, as a way to feel superior through Buddhist vocabulary and practices that others don't know. Every time you think I practice Zen, I understand this, you have created a new layer of mud on the diamond that you should be cleaning. The brutal truth of the Lingji teachings: if you find the Buddha, kill the Buddha. This is not poetic metaphor. It is literal instruction to destroy veneration of spiritual figures, sacred concepts, even Zen itself. If you turn Buddha into an idol, you create a new attachment. If you turn Zen into identity, I am a Zen practitioner, you create a new prison that needs to be demolished. Zen masters often ridicule their own teachings after lecturing for hours. They say, everything I said is rubbish. If you believed a single word, you miss the point. This is not nihilism or contradiction. It is a radical refusal to allow truth to become dogma, liberation to become a new belief system. The meaning of killing the Buddha is to cut off even veneration of that which liberated you, because the moment you venerate liberation, it becomes an obstacle. The mockery of one's own discourse is an operational compass. The master destroys even the student's self-confidence to force complete autonomy, to prevent the student from exchanging old external dependence for new spiritual dependence. Here is the ultimate responsibility that no one escapes. When you realize there is no path, no goal, nothing to achieve, you also lose all excuses to continue suffering. You can no longer blame lack of enlightenment for your problems. You can no longer postpone real life until when I wake up. You can no longer use spiritual practice as sophisticated procrastination. Before studying Zen, mountains are mountains. During Zen study, mountains are not mountains. After understanding Zen, mountains are mountains again. You return to the ordinary, completely transformed. But the difference is not in what you see. It's in how you inhabit what you see without a narrative of separation. Nowhere to go means you are complete now. You always have been. The only question is whether you accept this or continue searching for glasses that are on your head. The operator of lucidity practices brutal self-questioning. Am I using Zen as a new identity? As a project of superiority? As a way to feel special? If so, burn it all. This is the common mind, is the path applied without romanticism. True Zen adds nothing to your life. It simply removes conceptual obstacles until this remains. Life happening, you happening, with no story about it, no narrative that it should be different. Every time you find yourself defending, I practice Zen as an identity. You have completely failed because authentic Zen destroys even the Zen practitioner, leaving only action arising directly from perception without an egoic intermediary claiming credit. This is Dharma without dogma operating. You are finally free because there is no one else trying to be free. Only freedom happening without an owner. Zen is not a philosophy to be studied, a state to be attained, or a practice to accumulate spiritual merit. It is the systematic destruction of all seeking until only direct presence remains. Unmediated by concept, Bodhidharma did not bring teachings when he arrived in China. He brought the brutal demolition of the illusion that liberation comes from outside, from sacred texts, from accumulated rituals. The tools you have known, as in practice, Buddhist koans, direct transmission, build nothing. They only remove obscurations that you have mistaken for permanent identity. The cold truth of Zen Buddhism is that you were never lost. You only believed in the narrative of separation between self and problem, between seeker and enlightenment, between ordinary and sacred. When Zen cuts this artificial division, this remains. Chopping wood and carrying water are not preparation for spiritual life. They are spiritual. Life itself, when performed with total presence, without the narrative that it should be different or better. Now you see the complete mechanism without the fog of romanticization. The ordinary mind is already the path, because there has never been a path separate from life happening now. Anatta non-self is not a depressive theory about non-existent. It is radical liberation from having to protect a fixed identity that never existed as a permanent entity. Attachment is a technical mechanism for manufacturing suffering through the impossible demand that the impermanent be permanent, that the process in flux obey its need for stability. Mushin no mind is not mystical emptiness, is an operational state where action arises directly from perception without excessive mediation from the ego, asking, how does this affect me? Koans are not philosophical enigmas. They are viruses designed to crash the operating system of the conceptual mind until it admits defeat and allows direct perception and final destruction. Authentic Zen destroys even the concept of Zen, even veneration of the Buddha, even the identity of practitioner, because the moment you transform liberation into a new egoic prison, you have completely missed the point. Stop searching for what you already are. This isn't motivational advice. It's a technical protocol for interrupting the cycle of searching that creates the illusion of incompleteness. Choose an ordinary activity today and perform it with full attention, without the narrative that it's less important than formal practice. Washing dishes, walking, making coffee with complete presence in each sensation. Practice Zazen or contemplate koans, not to achieve something in the future, but to train disidentification with thought. Now each return of attention when the mind wanders is a training in observation without attachment. Apply Mushin to decisions you already know are necessary, but postpone due to hesitation. Act before the thought completes its cycle of doubt. Respond to life without the filter of what if it goes wrong. Identify your 3 greatest attachments and contemplate the total loss of each one, not as pessimism, but as a training in accepting the impermanence that is already operating without your permission. You can no longer use "I'm not enlightened" as an excuse to procrastinate being fully present in this moment. Zen cut off that escape. You are already complete. You always have been. The search for future completeness is a problem, not a solution. There is no more when I reach X. Life will begin. Life is happening now while you postpone real presence, waiting for ideal conditions that will never arrive. What will you do now that you can no longer pretend you don't know? How will you navigate the next difficult situation without falling into the automatic reactivity of defending an illusory self? When will you stop using spiritual practice as a new project of superiority and simply inhabit the ordinary without a narrative that you deserve something better? Either you accept full responsibility for operating with lucidity in this imperfect moment, or you continue in the fantasy that one day, when I awaken, you will finally be allowed to live. Zen is not a path to future enlightenment. It's the brutal realization that you were never lost, only busy searching for glasses that are on your head. The search is the problem. The end of the search is not finding what was missing, but stopping the search for what you never lost. Mountains are mountains again after you traverse the illusion of separation, but you inhabit transformed the mountains without a narrative that they should be different, without ego claiming credit for being alive, without resistance to the simple fact that this is what is happening now. Cold truth is a guarantee of reliability. It doesn't change according to your preferences. It doesn't lie to make you feel special. It doesn't negotiate with the ego's demands for external meaning. You are complete. You always have been. Accept this or continue suffering from the refusal to accept, but don't confuse refusal with a real problem that needs to be solved. If this protocol shattered your expectations about Zen as a path to self-improvement, perfect that expectation was an obstacle keeping you on an eternal quest. Continue practicing radical presence in the ordinary without romanticizing practice as something separate from life. Strategic Buddhism doesn't promise future enlightenment that will save you from suffering. It demands that you operate with lucidity now, traversing pain manufacturing mechanisms without narrative anesthesia. Subscribe to receive more spiritual demolition protocols that cut through illusions instead of decorating them with sophisticated Buddhist vocabulary. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next applied operational awareness training. This channel doesn't exist to make you evolve spiritually. By accumulating knowledge without practice, it exists to destroy the fantasy that you need to evolve, that something is missing, that completeness lies somewhere beyond this imperfect moment. If you seek comfort in ignorance and emotional validation that you're on the right path, look elsewhere. But if you're ready for constant lucidity training without promises of quick relief, become a practicing operator instead of just studying about practice. The conscious elite doesn't wait for permission to inhabit reality with total presence. It executes with rigorous discipline, repetition without drama, and radical acceptance that consciousness demands daily effort without any guarantee of future reward.